She was sitting on a crate in the dim light of an abandoned warehouse, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of trouble. The flickering of a single bulb cast an eerie glow, making the setting feel even more tense. Sarah had volunteered to guard the supply crate, knowing that it contained food, water, and other vital supplies. Her heart raced as she listened to every creak and whisper around her. She hadn't eaten for hours, the sinking feeling in her stomach reminded her of that. The world outside had changed so much. Only a few months ago, life had been normal. Then the chaos erupted, supplies became scarce, and people did desperate things. Sarah had formed a small group with friends who were now more like family. They depended on each other, and she had taken this job very seriously. The crate was their lifeline. As she scanned the shadows, she heard footsteps approaching. Instinctively, she tightened her grip on the small knife in her pocket. Flimsy piece of metal, really, but it was all she had. The footsteps got closer until a figure stepped into the light. "Hey," the figure said softly. It was David. He had joined their group a few weeks back. His calm demeanor made him an instant asset. Sarah took a breath, relaxing just a bit. She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, his eyes gentle. "Yeah, for now." Sarah shifted on her crate, the tension easing just enough to bear the moment. He frowned slightly. "You don't look fine." The question caught her off guard. It wasn't just the raw concern in his voice, it was the way he cared, as if she meant something, as if her well-being mattered. She felt a warmth in her chest, a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Not yet," she admitted, glancing away, ashamed. "I was." David stepped closer and sat down on the crate beside her, the weight of his presence calming her frayed nerves. "You can't guard this crate on an empty stomach," he said gently. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread, wrapped carefully to stay fresh. "I can't take that," Sarah protested, looking at the simple food like it was gold. "Sure you can," he replied, a slight grin breaking the tension. "I insist. Look, I grabbed a few extra rations while I was out." Her heart swelled as she accepted the bread. It was just a small gesture, but it felt monumental. She hadn't been able to focus on anything other than surviving, but now she felt a spark of life return. "Thank you," she mumbled, biting into the bread. It was dry but delicious, more satisfying than she'd expected. She realized how hungry she truly was, and she couldn't remember the last time someone had cared enough to share with her. As they ate in silence, the worry of the world outside felt a little lighter, as if their shared moment created a bubble of safety. Sarah looked at David, really looked at him for the first time. There was something in his emerald eyes, a glimmer of hope perhaps, or maybe just determination. "You're doing a good job here," he said, breaking the quiet. "Yeah, well, it's all we have left," Sarah replied, her voice low. David nodded. "I get that." His words hung in the air, piercing through her brave facade. Taking a deep breath, Sarah felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she spoke. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I understand, but sometimes letting people in can be the only way to truly survive. You keep holding everything in." Those words struck deep, echoing in a place she hadn't dared to acknowledge. Everyone around them had been fighting their own battles, each person trapped in their own cycle of fear and loneliness. They had all been through so much, but here she was, thrust into a darkness she didn't feel strong enough to face. His presence offered a light she couldn't deny. She asked, glancing over at him. David gazed into the shadows outside the light, as if contemplating their next move. "We'll keep our heads down. Gather more supplies, find more people we can trust." As they sat together, sharing the little food they had, Sarah felt hope begin to bloom inside her. Maybe it was okay to let someone in. Maybe she didn't have to do this alone. Heavy silence of the warehouse faded into the background as they talked about everything and nothing. They laughed quietly about the bizarre meals they had tried to create from what little rations they could find. With each story, Sarah felt her heart lift, but then a noise shattered the moment, a rustling sound from the far corner of the warehouse. Sarah's pulse quickened and she nearly jumped up. Instinct took over as she stood tall, ready to defend the crate with her life. "Wait," David whispered, grabbing her arm. He moved cautiously toward the sound, and Sarah's breath hitched as the shadows swallowed him. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking in the dark, another desperate soul, a threat. She tightened her grip on the knife, her instincts screaming to protect what they had fought so hard to maintain. Moments felt like hours as she waited in the dark, the weight of the uncertainty heavy in the air. She called softly, but the only response was the echo of her own voice. Then from the shadows, David emerged, his expression tense. "It's just a stray cat," he said, relief flooding his voice. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. David chuckled and the atmosphere shifted. "Yeah, a hungry one too." He knelt down, offering the cat a small piece of the bread from earlier, and the cat cautiously approached, nudging at the food. Watching him, Sarah couldn't help but smile. "You'll be the cat whisperer in the apocalypse," she teased. David laughed, and together they watched as the cat devoured the bread, completely oblivious to their human troubles. In that moment, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. They were armed with food, safety, and a glimmer of trust that hadn't existed before that night. Sarah looked at David, seeing his kindness etched into his features and knowing they were stronger together. As the cat finished eating and disappeared back into the shadows, David turned to Sarah. See? We're not alone in this, and neither is that cat. Her heart warmed at his words. You're right, she said, gazing into the warmth of his eyes. He nodded, understanding her struggle. I can't promise it will be easy, but we're all in this together. We can help each other. That moment, a sense of connection began to grow between them like a vine reaching out for sunlight. Sarah could see a future where they weren't only guarding crates, but also each other. Okay, she whispered, feeling an unfamiliar thrill at the thought. As they settled back on the crate, the quiet stretched comfortably around them. Sarah felt more than just guarded. She felt a flicker of hope, something she thought was long lost. David laid his hand on hers. We'll figure this out piece by piece, day by day. His voice was steady, a promise that filled the air with warmth. Sarah smiled, feeling a bond forming that she hadn't imagined possible in such dark times. It was a fragile beginning, but it was in moments like these shared bread, laughter, and a stray cat that a fortress of trust began to build. With the world outside still chaotic and uncertain, at that moment she felt anchored by the kindness of a friend. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to let the light in. The sound of footsteps echoed in the dimly lit warehouse, slicing through the thick silence like a knife. Sarah's heart raced as she gripped the knife tucked in her pocket. Was it friend or foe? Her gaze flicked to the supply crate beside her, the lifeline of food and water for her small group. It was all they had left. She couldn't let anyone take it from her. When the figure stepped into the flickering light, her muscles tensed. It was David, sweat glistening on his forehead, his eyes wide but calm. Instinctively, she relaxed slightly, though her grip on the knife remained firm. I saw someone outside, he breathed, his voice low, almost a whisper. She barely recognized her own voice, tight with tension. Yeah, he replied, brushing his hair out of his eyes. Holding up, the truth was she felt frayed and raw. The world outside had changed drastically in a matter of weeks. Food, shelter, even trust dwindling like the flickering light overhead. People were desperate, and desperation often led to danger. I'm fine, she lied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David frowned, his gaze penetrating. You don't look fine. The question caught her off guard. He knew better than that. While everything around them felt hostile and uncertain, David always had a way of cutting through the noise with his simple concern. No, I was busy, she said, avoiding his gaze as if she could hide the hollow pang of hunger gnawing at her stomach. He asked, a slight smirk dancing on his lips, but his eyes held worry. She snapped, heat flooding her face, but even as she spoke, her stomach growled, betraying her. His expression softened. Sarah, I care about you. You can't keep doing this. He reached into his bag, pulling out a small piece of bread wrapped tightly, a rare find in these times. I can't take that, she protested, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. How could he see her struggle and still offer help? Sure you can. Look, I grabbed a few extra rations. You need food more than I do, he insisted, holding it out, his gaze unwavering. Tears stung her eyes as she accepted the bread. It felt like an act of kindness she hadn't felt in ages, an acknowledgement that she mattered, that someone cared. She took a small bite, the taste bland yet satisfying. Thank you, she murmured, her voice softer, the weight of her pride beginning to lift. They shared a brief silence, the distant sounds of the outside world dulling as they both focused on the moment. This wasn't just about sharing food, it was about connection, about trust in a world where both felt increasingly distant. You should let people in more, you know, David said, breaking that silence. The words struck her like a thunderbolt, letting people in. It felt risky, terrifying. She had learned the hard way trust could lead to pain, to betrayal. I'm not sure I can, she confessed, looking down at her hands, feeling vulnerable. You can, he replied gently, leaning in. We're in this together. Letting someone in isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Just then, a low rustling broke the moment, sending adrenaline coursing through Sarah's veins. Focusing on the noise, she searched the shadows. She whispered, her heart racing. David's expression turned serious as he stood, scanning the warehouse. Are you crazy? Panic surged, and she gripped her knife tightly, preparing to defend what they had left. David glanced back at her, eyes intense. Can't fight if you're worried about protecting me too. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about trust. Maybe he was right. She took a step back, hands shaking, and watched as he moved cautiously toward the sound. She hissed, her heart pounding. Stepping into the shadows, his silhouette melded with the darkness, and for a moment all seemed at a standstill. The warehouse creaked, echoes of the past weaving through the air, reminding Sarah how fragile everything felt. Then from the shadows, David emerged with a tabby cat, its fur matted, ribs protruding. Relief flooded Sarah, followed by a soft laugh as David knelt down, offering what was left of the bread to the little creature. I think we've got company, he said, grinning. The cat sniffed cautiously, then began devouring the bread as David chuckled softly. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Here they were, a boy, a girl, and a stray cat finding solace in each other's company during a time of chaos. It was a simple moment, but one loaded with hope, with connection that felt profound in a world where loneliness had become a way of life. I can't believe you brought a cat in here, she said, her laughter lightening the air. It's survival of the fittest, you know. The kids got to eat too, he replied, now petting the cat, the creature arching into his touch, seeking comfort. As they sat together, Sarah felt her defenses lower, realizing that maybe it was okay to lean on someone. The chaos outside felt less daunting when shared, the storm that raged beyond their warehouse walls overshadowed by this small slice of normalcy. David said, finally rising from the ground, "No harm done." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right, I guess I'm just afraid." He took a step closer, his voice steady. "Fear isn't a weakness, it's human, but facing it together could change things." Her heart stirred, creating something new that felt impossible amidst the wreckage of their lives. But she longed for connection, for something more than mere survival. She asked, her voice uncertain, vulnerability creeping back in. He replied, a spark of determination in his eyes. "You won't know unless you try." A comfortable silence enveloped them again, breathing life into their heavy hearts. The outside world felt like a distant dream, an echo of what once was before everything fell apart. As the cat finished the last of the bread, David let out a satisfied sigh. "Tomorrow we should gather more supplies." Sarah hesitated. "Then we'll figure it out," he replied simply, his confidence disarming her fears. At that moment she felt the weight of unspent emotions surfacing, memories of lost friends, hunger, betrayals, all swirling within her. "I've lost so much, David," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I know," he responded quietly, "but there's still so much left to gain, even if it feels impossible. Don't shut down." Opening up felt like unearthing buried treasure. No, it felt like a risk. She asked him, genuinely curious. "I guess I just remember that vulnerability is also strength. It's okay to let people in as long as you're careful who you choose," he answered, leaning against the crate thoughtfully. His words hung in the air, and Sarah felt a flicker of possibility ignite within her. She took a deep breath, letting it settle. I want to try, I want to trust. If you fall, I'll be there to help you up. It's better to fall together than to stand alone," he said, a warm smile breaking across his face, refreshing and real. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. Maybe it was okay to lean on David, to let the walls around her heart break down piece by piece. As they continued talking, sharing their fears and dreams, the warehouse felt less like a fortress protecting a fragile supply crate, and more like a sanctuary filled with hope, laughter, and a future they could build together. Night deepened around them, but inside, the glow of that single flickering light suddenly felt illuminating in a way it hadn't before. They were just two souls navigating a chaotic world, but together they could face the darkness, signifying the first step toward healing and rebuilding. Tomorrow was unknown, but with a connection forged from trust, courage, and simple acts of kindness, Sarah was ready to face it head-on. She wasn't just guarding the supply crate anymore, she was safeguarding hope, and that made all the difference. The air was thick with tension as Sarah crouched low beside the weathered supply crate, her heart pounding louder than the distant echoes of chaos outside. This crate was all that stood between her group and desperation. Inside were food, water, and essentials, everything they needed to survive in a world that had spiraled into chaos. For hours, she held her breath, focusing on every sound, every shadow. Just yesterday, someone from their group hadn't returned after a supply run. Fear of losing someone gripped her heart tightly. It felt like the weight of the world pressed down on her. Then came the footsteps. They moved swiftly, purposefully. Sarah's hand curled around the knife tucked in her pocket, her mind racing. Was it friend or foe? Her pulse raced, and in the dim light, she thought of all the ways she could protect what little they had left. When the figure stepped into view, her body tensed, ready for a fight. But it was David, his expression a mix of relief and concern. He called, his voice a whisper. She asked, eyeing him closely. "Yeah, but not for long. We need to keep moving," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if the shadows could swallow him whole. Moving, panic clawed at her insides. He moved closer, his usual easy demeanor replaced by urgency. Sarah drew back slightly. David hesitated for a moment, catching his breath. "The others are worried about you. I came to check in, but..." The question hung in the air like a thunderstorm cloud, ready to burst. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, the truth caught in her throat. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and she felt the emptiness gnawing at her. "I've been busy," she finally replied, the words sounding weak even to her own ears. "You can't keep pretending like this, Sarah. You're not a machine," he said, concern etched on his face. As always, he had a way of cutting through her defenses, making her face the truth. "I can't think about me right now." He stepped closer, his eyes steady and unwavering. "You're not going to be able to protect anything if you're running on empty." There was something in his voice that made her pause. It wasn't just the urgency, it was care. She let out a small sigh, her shoulders slumping at the weight of it all. "I can't take anything from you, you need it too," she murmured, glancing away. David reached into his pack and pulled out a small piece of bread, the edges crisp, but it was food nonetheless. "I grabbed extra rations." He opened his hand, the bread resting in his palm like a precious gem. For a moment she froze, staring at it as if it held the answers to all her questions. "They won't." His voice was unyielding. Maybe it was the tenderness in his gaze, or perhaps the emptiness in her stomach that drew her in. She took the bread, her fingers brushing against his, and for the first time all day, felt a warmth spread within her. she whispered, her voice breaking. His expression softened, a burst of understanding crossing his features. It's okay to feel that way, we're all in this together. The sincerity in his voice, mixed with the realization of her hunger, washed over her like a tide. I've been doing it alone for so long, she confessed. David took a step back, giving her space. Sometimes in chaos we find strength in each other. A flicker of vulnerability ignited in her chest, a feeling she had buried under layers of fear for so long. She looked at him, feeling something shift between them. Okay, she said finally, her voice steadier. Suddenly, a rustle from deeper within the warehouse shattered their tentative connection. Sarah spun around, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her grip on the knife tightened. She hissed, fear clenching her heart. Stay behind me, he said, instinctively positioning himself in front of her. No way, she replied, lifting the knife. The tension crackled in the air as they both peered into the shadows, adrenaline surging. David glanced back at her, his eyes serious. Just let me check first. Heart thudding in her chest, she nodded, staying put but feeling each moment stretch like eternity as he moved cautiously toward the darkness. Seconds felt like hours as she awaited his return, her mind racing with the possibilities of danger lurking in the dark thieves or desperate souls in search of food. She whispered, her voice barely a breath. Yeah, just a second, he murmured back, his silhouette becoming a part of the shadows. Finally, he came back, tension easing from his shoulders as he stepped into the light. It's just a cat, he said, a mix of relief and amusement dancing on his face. She asked, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. Yep. He knelt down, gently coaxing the little tabby toward him, holding out a small piece of bread. The cat approached, cautiously sniffing at the offering before starting to munch away, completely oblivious to the chaos of the world. That's one brave little creature, Sarah murmured, a smile creeping across her face. David chuckled, glancing at her while petting the cat. It's a reminder, isn't it? It was true. Somehow, amidst their struggle, the simple act of caring for this small animal sparked a glimmer of hope within her. She asked, feeling lighter as the cat finished the bread. We take it one step at a time, David said, his presence calming her racing mind. Her heart swelled at the thought. I know we can. If we keep our eyes open and work together, there's hope out there, he replied, his gaze steady and reassuring. Just as the cat finished, the warehouse doors creaked open. Startling, Sarah reached for her knife instinctively. David held up a hand. A figure appeared, casting a long shadow on the ground. Sarah recognized him, Sam, another member of their group. Sam shouted, panting heavily, his clothes tattered and stained. I found. Sarah rushed forward, her heart racing as a wave of hope surged within her. Sam stumbled into the light, revealing a large backpack stuffed with cans and supplies. His eyes sparkled with excitement. David chuckled, embracing the moment of light amidst their darkness. As Sam dropped the backpack to the ground, Sarah felt something shift inside her in energy, a sense of unity rising from the depths of despair. Looks like we're not alone in this after all, David said, his eyes meeting hers, both of them understanding that they had created something special here together. Sarah knelt down, rummaging through the supplies, finding canned food and bottled water, a bounty she hadn't dared to hope for. Let's not waste any time, she said, excitement igniting throughout her. Sam grinned, exhaustion mixed with pride reflecting in his eyes. Exactly. Days had turned into weeks, but in that moment, things felt lighter. Everyone was working together, sharing food, sharing laughter, and in those moments, survival felt less like a burden and more like a spark of resilience binding them together. Working side by side, they began to build something real. With each laugh shared and each supply scavenged, the isolation began to fade. They formed a connection amidst the chaos of community, and as for Sarah, the weight of fear began to lift. She learned that letting people in, spreading warmth, sharing food wasn't just about survival. It was about building a life again, finding joy even when everything else felt lost. Sarah, you're doing it, David said one evening as they sat around a small fire. The glow of the fire illuminated her face and she felt a smile spread across her lips. Like home, he added, and she agreed, realizing that they had come together not just to survive, but to thrive. In the days ahead, they grew stronger as a unit, each obstacle they faced only reinforcing their bond. They navigated the treacherous landscape together, every small victory igniting hope. And in those moments amidst the fears and the unknown, amid laughter and survival, Sarah learned that even when the world seemed dark, together they could light the way. She wasn't just guarding a supply crate, she was guarding hope, community, and the promise of a brighter future. And as the shadows loomed behind them, they moved forward, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. In the dim light of the abandoned warehouse, Sarah crouched low beside the weathered supply crate, every muscle in her body tense and alert. Moments stretched into infinity, shadows flickering as the city outside descended into chaos. She had volunteered to guard this crate, knowing all too well that inside were not just supplies, but the lifeline for her small group. It held their future. Hours passed, steeped in silence, the only sound being the distant wail of sirens and the faint creaks of the building around her. Each sound pulled at her nerves, each rustle of paper or shuffle of debris igniting panic deep in her gut. The struggle for survival had stripped everyone of their humanity, leaving a raw fear that clung to the air like fog. But it wasn't just the sounds that troubled her. It was the gnawing hunger creeping into her thoughts like a slow poison. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, when the world still felt somehow normal, and now her stomach echoed with reminders that she was indeed alive. The weight of empty promises hung heavy in her heart. Just then a noise broke through her fog of worry, footsteps advancing toward her. Adrenaline surged through her veins, and she instinctively gripped the small knife in her pocket, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Would it be thieves? Aggressors looking to take their supplies, but when the figure stepped into the light, relief flooded her, a wave of familiarity. It was David. His wild hair, usually tousled with a carefree touch, was tangled and plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were wide, but there was a calmness about him. He whispered urgently, rushing forward. She asked, glancing around, every instinct telling her to be on guard. Yeah, but we should hurry. He paused, looking at her with concern. His question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, the truth tripping over her tongue. Would she confess that she hadn't eaten since dawn? The words felt slippery, caught between pride and vulnerability. Busy, she finally said, forcing a nonchalant shrug that felt hollow. David replied, his voice laced with concern. Somehow his words made her stomach ache even more. I said I'm fine, she lied, but even as the words escaped her mouth, she felt the familiar twist of anxiety. David leaned closer, his eyes steady and piercing, as if he could see right through her facade. You can't keep pretending like this. You need strength to protect what we have. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small piece of bread, its edges crusty but intact. The sight of it knocked the breath from her lungs. I can't take that, she protested, her heart pounding. How could he offer her such a thing when they were all struggling? Of course you can, he insisted, holding it out, his palm open and unwavering. We're a team. The warmth in his voice reached something deep inside her, a flicker of trust fighting against the tide of her self-sufficiency. She hesitated, staring at the bread as if it were made of gold. Then, surrendering to her hunger, she took it from him, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment, a spark of warmth in a cold world. Thank you, she muttered, the words feeling inadequate. As she took a bite, the crust crumbled and the taste exploded in her mouth, almost too much to handle after so much time without food. It was more than just food. It was kindness, care, and connection in a world that had grown so painfully lonely. David watched her, a mixture of relief and admiration in his eyes. See, she nodded, chewing slowly, feeling each bite as if it were a piece of life being restored to her. She asked around a mouthful of bread. I had a snack earlier, he replied, shrugging it off, but she didn't miss the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of selflessness she admired. She asked suddenly, probing into the heart of his concern, this is survival. He contemplated her words, eyes reflecting a depth she hadn't seen before. Because we're all we have. When we let the walls close in, we lose sight of what makes us human. His words cut through the haze of fear and isolation she had wrapped around herself. Trust, could she afford it? She had learned to keep people at a distance, aware that betrayal often came from those closest to you. Sometimes it's okay to need others, David continued, the warmth in his voice coaxing her defenses down. We all have our battles. Before she could respond, another noise emerged from the deep shadows of the warehouse. The tension snapped back and Sarah's defenses sprang up again. The deep thrumming of her heart echoed in her ears as she gripped the knife instinctively. She whispered, her eyes darting around. Stay behind me, David commanded, his tone low but firm as he stepped forward, ready to face whatever lurked within the darkness. Don't be ridiculous. She shot back, her adrenaline kicking in as she stood tall beside him, prepared to defend what remained. David shot her a look, the seriousness etched in his features. Taking a deep breath, Sarah peered into the shadows, her pulse racing, every instinct screaming to brace for danger. She whispered, fear and adrenaline lacing her voice. Just a moment, he responded, inching forward cautiously. With every second that passed, the tension coiled tighter, the unknown pressing on her chest like a weight. Then, as David peered deeper into the darkness, he emerged with nothing to show but a slight sigh of relief. It's just a cat, he said, chuckling softly, and the tension melted momentarily. Sarah blinked in disbelief, half laughing as David held up a small stray, its fur matted and dirty, but its eyes bright and curious. Looks like it's hungry too, he said, kneeling down and extending a piece of bread toward the timid creature. Sarah watched in awe as the cat cautiously approached, sniffing at the offered food before eagerly devouring it. Something about the gesture felt almost magical in that moment, like an anchoring thread connecting them all amidst the storm. Even this little guy knows how to look for help, David remarked, standing back up and grinning. Yeah. We all need someone to look out for us, she said, the warmth blooming inside her chest. Exactly, he replied, a spark of understanding igniting between them. The warmth of kindness seemed to light the corners of the warehouse. In that small act, Sarah felt her walls starting to crack. She asked, glancing over at David, feeling the shift within her. Tomorrow we'll gather more supplies. His voice was steady, and he looked at her with that confidence she had begun to trust. She challenged, a flicker of fear creeping back. He stepped closer, his eyes reflective. It's about making connections, Sarah. Together, as they stood side by side with the cat's gentle purring filling the stillness, hope began to unfurl in the corners of Sarah's heart. Maybe trusting someone didn't mean losing herself. Maybe it meant finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. As the night deepened, they shared stories of their past before everything changed, recounting moments filled with laughter and light. Each word brought them closer, defying the weight of the world outside. "Tomorrow I'll help you gather supplies," Sarah finally said, feeling a spark of determination ignite within her. David grinned. The shadows of despair still loomed outside, but as the fire crackled and their laughter echoed against the cracked walls, something shifted within her, a promise that they could face it together. As they talked late into the night, a notion began to take root. Perhaps they could rebuild what was lost, brick by brick, trust by trust. Their own little community, fortified through shared vulnerability. Days passed, and true to their word, they scoured the city for supplies, working side by side. With each scavenging trip, Sarah felt the tightness in her chest ease as her trust in David deepened. They became a team searching, finding, laughing in the face of adversity. An unexpected bond grew as they weathered storms together, both external and internal. The world outside became a little softer, a little brighter, as they navigated through darkness hand in hand. One evening, with a fire crackling behind them, Sarah looked at David and said, "I never thought I could face this without crumbling." He smiled at her, a resonating warmth in his eyes. In that moment, as Sarah reflected on her journey, she recognized the powerful truth: they weren't just guarding a supply crate anymore. They were nurturing hope, rebuilding connections, and reclaiming their humanity amidst a world that sought to tear it apart. Together, against the shadows, they forged a path forward, their laughter echoing heartily, a testament to resilience, proving that even in the darkest of times, light could shine through, illuminating the journey ahead. In a world that had changed overnight, they had found something worth fighting for, a community woven together through trust. And that was a treasure worth protecting, more than any supply crate could ever hold. She was perched on a dilapidated crate in the shadowy corner of a warehouse, her heart racing as the squeak of old metal echoed in the silence. The air was thick with uncertainty, and every creak made her jump. Sarah was guarding the supply crate, her eyes constantly scanning the dimly lit surroundings. Inside that crate were their life essentials: food, water, and supplies for survival in a world spiraling into chaos. The weight of the moment felt heavy, and Sarah shifted restlessly on the crate, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't eaten since early morning, the gnawing hunger stirring a sense of weakness inside her. Thoughts of her friends, of her little makeshift family filled her mind. Each of them depended on her. They had lost too many already, she couldn't fail them too. Suddenly, footsteps echoed toward her, sharp and deliberate. Her heart pounded as she instinctively gripped the knife tucked in her pocket, ready for whatever darkness might emerge. A familiar voice called out, cutting through her tension. It was David. Relief washed over her, but she didn't let her guard down just yet. He stumbled into the light, panting slightly, a mix of dirt and sweat coating his clothes. She asked, her voice low but firm. "Yeah, for now," he replied, glancing over his shoulder. "But I'm not sure how long it'll stay that way." The question felt bitter against her tongue. "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to do everything alone," he said, his tone earnest yet gentle. At that moment, Sarah felt the weight of those words crash over her. She had trained herself to be strong, to survive on her own. Vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. He pressed, concern etched across his face. The question made her flinch. Her pride rose, clawing at her throat. "I told you I'm fine," she replied, but the lie felt thin even as she spoke. The truth was, she hadn't eaten since dawn, her stomach now a hollow reminder of what was at stake. David stepped closer, and Sarah could feel the warmth radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold of the warehouse. "You're not fine, you look worn out." His words pierced through the armor she had built around her emotions. The truth was uncomfortable. She had become so accustomed to keeping her walls up that allowing even a moment of weakness felt terrifying. "I'm just focused," she replied, her voice more a whisper. David tilted his head, studying her with unwavering eyes. Focused. For a moment, silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken fears and truths. It was then that reality struck her. The isolation she had forced upon herself in an attempt to be strong was starting to wear her down. He reached into his bag, and she caught a glimpse of bread peeking out between supplies. "Take this," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I can't, you need it," Sarah protested, her insides twisting at the thought of taking food from him when they were all suffering. "Don't argue with me, you need it more than I do," he insisted, holding out the bread, his eyes a mix of resolve and kindness. Slowly, hesitantly, she accepted the offering. As her fingers brushed his, she felt a spark of warmth that made her heart race. Taking a bite, the bread tasted like heaven, reminding her of simpler times before everything changed. "Thank you," she mumbled, the simple gesture feeling like a lifeline thrown into her stormy sea of despair. As she ate, David watched her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. It wasn't just concern she saw in his gaze, it was a quiet understanding, a shared burden. You think you're alone in all of this, but you're really not, he said, breaking the silence. We're all fighting, each in our own way. His words struck a chord deep inside her, echoing the loneliness she had carried for far too long. She said, fear creeping into her voice. Then I'll leave, he replied matter-of-factly. Something stirred within her. This was a moment, a turning point. She could choose to push him away or let him in, to guard her broken heart, or to open it up to the possibility of connection. Then a noise shattered their conversation, rustling that came from the depths of the warehouse. Sarah's instincts fired up again, and she instinctively tightened her grip on the knife. She breathed, her senses sharpening to a pinprick. Stay here, David whispered, taking a step forward, his body tense, ready to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. Like hell, she replied, refusing to let him face danger alone. He shouted back, his voice firm as he moved ahead cautiously. Heart-pounding, Sarah hesitated, battling the urge to scream at him to come back. Instead, she followed him into the darkness, both of them standing on the edge of uncertainty. Just then, from the shadows, a small form emerged, a scruffy dog, skinny and eyes wide with fear. It stood there, trembling, the sound of its whimpering echoing in the vast emptiness around them. Oh, Sarah breathed, relief washing over her. David crouched slowly, reaching out a hand. Hey there, buddy, he said softly, coaxing the scared creature closer. Sarah stepped forward, her heart swelling at the sight of the animal collapsing into David's hands. Looks like we're not the only ones in need, she said, her voice warming. As they fed the dog bits of bread, laughter bubbled up in the air, a moment of lightness within a world draped in shadows. The dog's tail wagged, a small flicker against the darkness surrounding them, and for a moment they allowed the turmoil of their lives to fade into the background. David said, still petting the dog. No, it isn't, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. With each bite shared between them and the little dog, the barriers around Sarah began to crumble. She had been holding her breath, trying desperately to shield herself from the pain, but this act of kindness, no matter how small, felt like healing. That's right, we have to look out for one another, David said, glancing over at her. The walls she had built around herself felt thinner as she felt warmth begin to coil inside her. She could see a glimmer of possibility, a world where connections mattered. As they sat together beneath the dim light of the warehouse, engrossed in laughter and canine antics, something began to shift in Sarah's heart. It wasn't just about guarding the crate anymore. It was about sharing hope, rebuilding bonds, and finding strength through their connection. The days that followed brought renewed determination. With each foray for supplies, David and Sarah worked side by side, gathering what they could while looking out for one another. They formed a kind of rhythm, a dance woven in trust and shared purpose. In those moments, Sarah began to feel the power of community, the understanding that each shared laugh, each moment of vulnerability was a thread weaving their lives together. One evening, huddled around a small campfire, she turned to David, her voice steady. You were right, he smiled, the warmth illuminating his features. Of course it does. The realization struck Sarah. Letting people in didn't mean losing her strength. It meant embracing the humanity that still flickered in the darkest corners. She watched as David shared his own fears about the future, carving away at her own hesitance. And as the weeks passed, the shadows outside still loomed, but within their small community, the light grew stronger. The bond formed through shared hardship created a sanctuary, something she hadn't thought possible amidst the turmoil. On one particularly challenging day, after a particularly close encounter with danger in the city, Sarah found herself exhausted and overwhelmed, sitting by the crate, staring at nothing. David approached, his expression softening as he watched her. He asked gently, kneeling beside her. I feel like I'm going to break, she admitted, tears prickling her eyes. He nodded, understanding radiating from him. It's okay to feel that way, we're all feeling it, but remember, you're not alone in this. In that moment, she realized that they didn't have to carry the burden of survival alone. Looking into his eyes, she felt a shift, a powerful reminder that vulnerability could forge stronger bonds. Thank you, David, she whispered, feeling a rush of gratitude not just for his words, but for the unwavering support that had become a lifeline. As they continued their fight for survival together, Sarah embraced the notion that they were not just guarding a supply crate, they were building a community, nurturing hope and rekindling humanity amidst a world gone dark. With every shared meal, every act of kindness, they strengthened their resolve. They became a testament to resilience, a beacon in the night, reminding each other that hope could survive even the bleakest of circumstances. And so, as the world outside raged on, Sarah found herself standing not just as a guardian of supplies, but as a protector of connection. Through trust, friendship, and shared vulnerability, they discovered that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about thriving together no matter the odds. The flickering light bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting eerie shadows across the dull concrete floor of the abandoned warehouse. Sarah crouched beside the supply crate, heart pounding, eyes darting to every corner. The world outside had become a distant storm, chaos ruling the streets. Inside this warehouse, the only thing she could focus on was guarding the crate, the lifeline for her ragtag group of survivors. Each creak of the wooden planks echoed like a gunshot in her mind. Her muscles were taut from waiting, the gnawing hunger twisting her insides. She hadn't eaten since morning. The world had turned upside down, and every day was a battle, a fight for scraps, for survival. As the sunlight dwindled, fear crept in like an unwelcome shadow. It was just then that she heard footsteps, quick, deliberate. A racing heartbeat filled her ears. Instinctively, she gripped the small knife tucked away in her pocket. Would it be another desperate soul? A threat the unknown clawed at her resolve. But when a familiar form stepped into the dim light, relief washed over her like a wave. It was David. He was moving fast, hair disheveled and clothes dusty. There was urgency in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper that caught her attention. He called out, the tension breaking a little. She breathed, slipping the knife back into her pocket. "For now," he replied, stepping closer but still glancing around. "I need to check on you." The question hit her like a jolt. She opened her mouth to respond, but the truth felt too heavy to speak. The words caught in her throat. Instead of answering, she shrugged, deflecting his concern. "I'm fine, just..." David's eyes hardened slightly but held a softness, to a mixture of understanding and worry. "You're not fine. You can't keep doing this on an empty stomach." A flash of frustration surged through her. She was fine, she had to be fine, but even as she thought that, her stomach growled in defiance, echoing her untruth. "Look, I know you can handle a lot," he continued, inching closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "I admire your strength, but you need to take care of yourself too." She snapped, the weight of her hunger mixing with the weight of her pride. "Here," David said, pulling something out of his bag. He held out a rough piece of bread, slightly crumbled but still good. She exclaimed, recoiling almost instinctively. "I can't take that from you. I need you to eat," he pressed, his eyes unwavering. In that moment, vulnerability shattered her defenses. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. She felt her resolve waver, the sharp edges of her pride starting to dull as she watched him stand there, offering not just bread, but the reminder that she didn't have to bear this burden alone. With a resigned sigh, she accepted it, feeling the warmth of his hand linger on hers as she took it. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eat," he instructed softly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a reassuring smile. Biting into the bread, flavors burst in her mouth. It was simple but filled with warmth, reminding her of a life before everything changed. As she chewed, she felt a flicker of strength return, a momentary reprieve from her hunger and despair. He said, the tension in his voice easing. But as she finished the last of it, a shadow flickered in the corner of her eye. Suddenly, she felt that tension snap back. Her heart raced again, and instinctively, she tightened her grip on the knife. She whispered, eyes darting to the darkness beyond. "Stay behind me," David ordered, stepping forward with an air of confidence. "No way," she replied fiercely, her adrenaline surging. "Just let me check first," he urged, concern flickering across his face. Every fiber of her being screamed to charge ahead, but there was something in David's voice that made her pause. For a brief moment, she felt the weight of their situation close in. Perhaps trusting him, even just this once, might not be the worst idea. She nodded slowly, fighting the urge to freeze up as David stepped cautiously toward the sound. Moments felt like hours as she watched, the tension straining every muscle in her body. She called, her voice barely a whisper. "Just checking," he replied, squinting into the shadows. Then out of the darkness, a small figure emerged, a stray cat, fur matted and face wary. Sarah blinked in surprise as it approached, starving yet curious. "Just a cat," David said, relief flooding his face. She echoed, half laughing, half crying. "Yeah, it looks hungry," he observed, kneeling down and slowly coaxing the animal forward. As the cat sniffed the air and crept closer, Sarah felt warmth wash over her again. "You're right, even it knows how to look for help," she said, taking a moment to process it. "Everyone does in times of need," David replied softly, a smile breaking across his face. Watching David feed the cat a piece of the bread she had just eaten made her heart swell. It was a small reminder that even in the darkest corners of their world, something could still flourish. As they shared their moment with the kitten, the noise outside dulled. The fear that gripped Sarah began to loosen a little, replaced by a flicker of hope and connection. She asked after a while, still entranced by the little creature. David paused, glancing at the cat then back at her. "We can't just hoard supplies for ourselves," she echoed, uncertainty creeping in again. "Then we'll face it together," he said, a fierce determination in his voice. With each word, Sarah felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The fear of allowing someone in began to feel less daunting. With each moment spent together, they were building something precious, a connection that could protect them both. "Okay," she said, drawing in a deep breath. As they continued to care for the cat, the shadows of the warehouse faded a little, replaced by a growing light of possibility. Days bled into weeks, and with each outing for supplies, they grew stronger together. David's easy laughter became a source of comfort, and Sarah found herself smiling against the backdrop of their struggle. She learned to lean on someone else, sharing the burden instead of hoarding it all herself. Sweltering afternoon, Sarah found herself sweating in the sun, sitting in the shade of the warehouse, a small can of beans in her hands. She turned to David, who was busy organizing the supplies they had gathered. "You know, I never thought I could let someone in again," she admitted, her voice quiet. He paused, looking at her with such understanding it made her heart soar. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah, but you don't have to carry everything alone." She felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. They were enjoying the small victories, the shared laughter, and the sense of having a family again in a world that had tried to tear them apart. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, had built a bond so strong that it felt unbreakable. Then came the day that changed everything. While on a supply run, Sarah found herself lost in thought, mindlessly mulling over the future, half distracted as they scavenged through an old storefront. The tension in the air began to shift, a sharp disturbance slicing through her focus. David's voice rang out, snapping her back to reality. With adrenaline surging, she turned just in time to see a group of desperate men approach, eyes wild and aggressive. Fear coiled tightly in her stomach, screaming at her to run. "Hands up," one shouted, his voice gravelly and threatening. Panic gripped her heart as she clutched her knife, pressing her back against the wall, ready to defend whatever little they had left. She whispered, looking at David. "Stay calm," he said, inching in front of her protectively. "We can talk this out." But as the thieves stepped closer, looking to take what was theirs, Sarah realized this was the moment she had been preparing for. The fear that had once completely paralyzed her twisted into something sharper, fierce determination. She shouted, her voice rising as she stepped out from behind David. "We can share, there's enough for everyone." The leader hesitated for a brief second, surprise flickering across his features. It was a moment she seized, willing her voice to remain steady despite the shaking in her hands. David shot her a look of shock, just as unprepared as she was, but she pressed on. "We all need to survive. You can take what's in the crate, but we can work together, help each other out." The group faltered, glancing at one another, uncertain. It was a chance to open the door to compassion, even amid desperation. David's hand brushed her arm lightly, a silent encouragement. She felt it ignite something within her, a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for everyone caught in this battle. "Think about it," she continued, her voice steadier now. "We've all lost so much, but together we can create something better." The tension in the air shifted, voices faded, and they began to lower their weapons. It wasn't about her, it was about the hope she had been cultivating alongside David, the lessons they had learned together. As the men considered her words, the atmosphere began to change. She wasn't just guarding a crate anymore. She was fighting for something more, for connection, for unity in a broken world. Finally, the leader lowered his weapon, but uncertainty still lingered. He asked, his tone softer. Sarah took a deep breath. "Let's collaborate instead of fight." The tension in the room slowly dispersed, replaced by tentative agreement. As the group began to discuss, ideas flowed, a plan began to form. In that moment, Sarah realized she had crossed a threshold. She was not merely guarding, she was building a bridge, a community. Days turned into weeks, and as Sarah gained their trust, their community flourished. David stood beside her every step of the way, a reliable ally. Together, they nurtured connections, creating a network of support and compassion. No longer did they shoulder the burdens of survival alone. They had cultivated a community that thrived on mutual trust, kindness, and the knowledge that they had each other's backs. And as the sun set on another day filled with laughter and rejuvenation, Sarah looked at David and felt a profound gratitude for the journey they had faced together. They had started as two individuals guarding a supply crate, but they had become so much more, a lifeline for each other, forging hope in a world desperate for light. In the end, they stood not just as survivors, but as architects of possibility, proving that even in the darkest of times, connections could thrive, igniting bright sparks of hope that could lead to a better tomorrow. As they embraced the future hand in hand, they knew they would face whatever came next together. The clatter of boots echoed in the hollow expanse of the warehouse, shattering the tense silence that wrapped around Sarah like a heavy blanket. She sat on a supply crate, her grip white-knuckled around the knife tucked into her pocket. Outside, the city had turned into a battleground, chaos reigning in the streets, but here she was, the sole guardian of their precious supplies, the last remnants of normalcy for her small group of survivors. Her heart raced as shadows danced under the flickering light, and each creak of the building made her muscles tense. Hours felt like days as she focused on the sounds around her, every rustle pricking her nerves. She hadn't eaten since dawn, the dull ache in her stomach twisted like a knife in her gut. Alone in her thoughts, she forgot this was a team effort. The hunger gnawed at her resolve, making her feel weak, vulnerable. And then she heard the footsteps. Quick and purposeful, the noise sliced through her focus like a blade. Her heart quickened, pulse pounding in her ears. Instinctively, she tightened her grip on her knife. Was it a threat, another desperate soul? She braced herself for whatever danger lurked just out of sight. When the figure stepped into the dim light, her tension dissolved into relief. It was David, breathless and wide-eyed, though there was an urgency in his step that warned her something was wrong. He called, his voice low but filled with concern. She asked, peering over the edge of the crate. "Yeah, but we need to move soon," he replied, glancing nervously at the shadows, sweat glistening on his forehead. "I needed to check on you." The question caught her off guard. It felt like a gentle jab, reminding her of the emptiness she had been trying to ignore. "I'm fine," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "No, you're not," David replied, frustration lacing his words. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence cutting through her isolation. You can't keep doing this on an empty stomach. Everything he said was true. The guilt churned in her belly as she nervously fidgeted with her knife. She didn't want to show weakness, didn't want to admit that she felt as fragile as the abandoned walls around her. I've been busy, she countered weakly, avoiding his gaze. There's busy and then there's starving, he pressed, his eyes firm. Please. With that, he reached into his bag and pulled out a wrapped piece of bread, holding it out like a small treasure. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had eaten all day. I can't take that, Sarah protested, her pride flaring. Why not? You're not a machine, Sarah. His voice was steady, a mix of concern and determination that stirred something within her. The truth was raw and painful, but as she looked at him, she felt a flicker of vulnerability start to soften the walls she had built. With a shaky breath, she accepted the bread, their fingers brushing for a moment, sending a jolt of warmth through her. Thank you, she murmured, breaking a piece off and biting into it. At that moment, something began to shift. The bread tasted like hope, filling not just her stomach, but also a void she hadn't known existed. She felt a warmth bloom inside her, not just from the food, but from the simple act of sharing. She asked, glancing at him as she chewed slowly, savoring the taste. I'll manage, he replied, taking a seat on the crate next to her. But watching you like this, his honesty caught her off guard, piercing the layers of defense she had wrapped around her heart. No one had cared so much about her well-being in a long time. I'm just focused, she said defensively. Focused on what? She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. This was a moment where she could choose to let someone in. As the silence stretched, she let herself breathe. I don't want to be weak, she finally admitted, her voice trembling slightly. David's expression softened. It's not weakness to let someone help you. As the words hung in the air, something clicked inside her. Maybe she didn't have to bear everything alone. Just the thought felt like a breath of fresh air in the stale atmosphere surrounding them. But before she could voice her thoughts, a noise echoed from the shadows rustling, the unmistakable sound of movement. Sarah felt adrenaline surge through her veins, a primal instinct kicking in. She whispered, adrenaline flooding her. Stay behind me, David commanded, rising to his feet, ready to confront whatever menace lurked inside the darkness. No, I'm not hiding behind you, she snapped, pulling out her knife, adrenaline sharpening her senses. He turned to her, sincerity flashing in his eyes. Just trust me this once. Heart pounding, she hesitated but nodded, holding her breath as he stepped forward cautiously into the dark. Seconds felt like lifetimes, her mind racing with every worst-case scenario she could think of. She called, her heart in her throat. I'm fine, he replied, though his voice was strained. Then, like a specter emerging from the shadows, he stepped back into the light relief washing over him. It's just a stray dog, he said, letting out a soft chuckle. Sarah blinked, feeling her tension melt away as he knelt down, coaxing the trembling animal forward. As the dog approached cautiously, Sarah joined him, feeling the warmth of compassion flow through her. There was something almost magical about the moment, a reminder that they were not alone in this struggle. Looks like we're not the only ones in need, she said, crouching beside David as the dog sniffed at his hand, desperate for a morsel. That's right, he replied, smiling. Watching the dog devour a piece of bread made her heart swell. They were sharing more than just sustenance, they were sharing kindness. She asked, her curiosity piqued as she looked at him. Tomorrow, let's try to gather more supplies. Maybe find some food for this guy too, he suggested, glancing at the dog. Sarah asked, uncertainty creeping back into her voice. Yes, he said firmly, his eyes unwavering. We're in this together. A flicker of hope ignited within her, defying the despair surrounding them. The idea of forming connections, of building a community had not been something she had dared to consider. Her heart warmed as they continued to feed the dog, watching it eat with relish. They were nurturing something beautiful, creating bridges where darkness had threatened to close them off. Days passed, and with each fragile moment, Sarah and David became more connected. Those moments of laughter grew in their gatherings, and they began to monitor each other more closely, both in needs and vulnerabilities. But one fateful day, during a supply run, she felt her heart drop as they crossed paths with a group of hostile individuals. Tension rippled through the air, and Sarah's instincts kicked in, fear gripping her gut. Hands up, one man shouted, brandishing a weapon. Panic gripped Sarah, but with David beside her, she felt something shift in the atmosphere. Determined to stand firm, she raised her hands slowly, assessing their eyes, desperate for an opening. She shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. You don't have to do this. The leader hesitated, surprise flickering across his features as he assessed her. It was a chance she needed to seize, willing her voice to maintain its steady strength. Think about it, if we share what we have, we can all survive. David echoed her, his presence a grounding force at her side. Let us show you the way. The men stepped back, uncertainty etched on their faces. Sarah's heart raced, but the fear slowly morphed into courage as she pressed on. We're trying to help each other. None of us wants to be here fighting. A tense silence descended, the weight of their collective struggle heavily hanging in the air. The hostility that marked their initial approach began to crack, and the hardened gazes softened just a little. Heavy breaths filled the space as her heart raced, waiting for the decision that might change everything. All right, the leader finally said, lowering his weapon slightly. This was a life-altering moment. Through a mix of desperation and vulnerability, they had found a way to bridge the chasm of fear. The men began to gather closer, curiosity piqued by their willingness to share. In that heartbeat of connection, Sarah felt the shift within herself. They weren't just guarding a crate anymore. They were actively building a community, a network of trust fortified against the storms of despair. As the sun began to set, casting everything in a golden glow, Sarah realized they had forged a bond stronger than mere survival. They had ignited a spark of hope, showing that in the midst of chaos, collaboration could win against all odds. And as the group settled down that night, laughter echoed against the battered walls of the warehouse, telling stories of resilience and shared purpose. As they sat around the flickering fire, Sarah turned to David and smiled, gratitude flowing through her. He met her gaze. "You took the first step. You were brave enough to reach out." With their allies gathered around them, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she had never anticipated. In a world torn apart, they were reclaiming the threads of humanity, weaving together moments of kindness and strength into a tapestry of survival. And in that moment, surrounded by newfound friends and a sense of community, she understood the beauty of relying on one another. They were no longer guarding a supply crate. They were nurturing a legacy of compassion, proving that in the face of darkness, light could still shine through. Together, they embraced the chaos while forging a brighter future, knowing that hope was not merely a flicker in the distance, but a living flame they could nurture together. The clatter of boots echoed in the hollow expanse of the warehouse, shattering the tense silence that wrapped around Sarah like a heavy blanket. She sat on a supply crate, her grip white-knuckled around the knife tucked into her pocket. Outside, the city had turned into a battleground, chaos reigning in the streets, but here she was, the sole guardian of their precious supplies, the last remnants of normalcy for her small group of survivors. Her heart raced as shadows danced under the flickering light, and each creak of the building made her muscles tense. Hours felt like days as she focused on the sounds around her, every rustle pricking her nerves. She hadn't eaten since dawn, the dull ache in her stomach twisted like a knife in her gut. Alone in her thoughts, she forgot this was a team effort. The hunger gnawed at her resolve, making her feel weak, vulnerable. And then she heard the footsteps. Quick and purposeful, the noise sliced through her focus like a blade. Her heart quickened, pulse pounding in her ears. Instinctively, she tightened her grip on her knife. Was it a threat, another desperate soul? She braced herself for whatever danger lurked just out of sight. When the figure stepped into the dim light, her tension dissolved into relief. It was David, breathless and wide-eyed, though there was an urgency in his step that warned her something was wrong. He called out, the tension breaking a little. She breathed, slipping the knife back into her pocket. "For now," he replied, stepping closer but still glancing around. "But we need to move soon. I came to check on you." The question hit her like a jolt. She opened her mouth to respond, but the truth felt too heavy to speak. The words caught in her throat. Instead of answering, she shrugged, deflecting his concern. "I'm fine, just..." David's eyes hardened slightly but held a softness, to a mixture of understanding and worry that stirred something within her. "You're not fine. You can't keep doing this on an empty stomach." Everything he said was true. The guilt churned in her belly as she nervously fidgeted with her knife. She didn't want to show weakness, didn't want to admit that she felt as fragile as the abandoned walls around her. "I've been busy," she countered weakly, avoiding his gaze. "There's busy and then there's starving," he pressed, his eyes firm. "Please." With that, he reached into his bag and pulled out a wrapped piece of bread, holding it out like a small treasure. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had eaten all day. "I can't take that," Sarah protested, her pride flaring. "Why not?" "You're not a machine, Sarah." His voice was steady, a mix of concern and determination that stirred something within her. The truth was raw and painful, but as she looked at him, she felt a flicker of vulnerability start to soften the walls she had built. With a shaky breath, she accepted the bread, their fingers brushing for a moment, sending a jolt of warmth through her. "Thank you," she murmured, breaking a piece off and biting into it. At that moment, something began to shift. The bread tasted like hope, filling not just her stomach, but also a void she hadn't known existed. She felt a warmth bloom inside her, not just from the food, but from the simple act of sharing. She asked, glancing at him as she chewed slowly, savoring the taste. "I'll manage," he replied, taking a seat on the crate next to her. "But watching you like this..." His honesty caught her off guard, piercing the layers of defense she had wrapped around her heart. No one had cared so much about her well-being in a long time. "I'm just focused," she said defensively. Focused on what? She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. This was a moment where she could choose to let someone in. As the silence stretched, she let herself breathe. "I don't want to be weak," she finally admitted, her voice trembling slightly. David's expression softened. "It's not weakness to let someone help you." As the words hung in the air, something clicked inside her. Maybe she didn't have to bear everything alone. Just the thought felt like a breath of fresh air in the stale atmosphere surrounding them. But before she could voice her thoughts, a noise echoed from the shadows rustling, the unmistakable sound of movement. Sarah felt adrenaline surge through her veins, a primal instinct kicking in. She whispered, adrenaline flooding her. "Stay behind me," David commanded, rising to his feet, ready to confront whatever menace lurked inside the darkness. "No, I'm not hiding behind you," she snapped, pulling out her knife, adrenaline sharpening her senses. He turned to her, sincerity flashing in his eyes. "Just trust me this once." Heart pounding, she hesitated but nodded, holding her breath as he stepped forward cautiously into the dark. Seconds felt like lifetimes, her mind racing with every worst-case scenario she could think of. She called, her heart in her throat. "I'm fine," he replied, though his voice was strained. Then, like a specter emerging from the shadows, he stepped back into the light relief washing over him. "It's just a stray dog," he said, letting out a soft chuckle. Sarah blinked in disbelief, feeling her tension melt away as he knelt down, coaxing the trembling animal forward. As the dog approached cautiously, Sarah felt the warmth of compassion flow through her. There was something almost magical about the moment, a reminder that they were not alone in this struggle. "Looks like we're not the only ones in need," she said, crouching beside David as the dog sniffed at his hand, desperate for a morsel. "That's right," he replied, smiling. Watching the dog devour a piece of bread made her heart swell. They were sharing more than just sustenance, they were sharing kindness. She asked, her curiosity piqued as she looked at him. "Tomorrow, let's try to gather more supplies, maybe find some food for this guy too," he suggested, glancing at the dog. Sarah asked, uncertainty creeping back into her voice. "Yes," he said firmly, his eyes unwavering. "We're in this together." A flicker of hope ignited within her, defying the despair surrounding them. The idea of forming connections, of building a community, had not been something she had dared to consider. Her heart warmed as they continued to feed the dog, watching it eat with relish. They were nurturing something beautiful, creating bridges where darkness had threatened to close them off. Days passed, and with each fragile moment, Sarah and David became more connected. Those moments of laughter grew in their gatherings, and they began to monitor each other more closely, both in needs and vulnerabilities. But one fateful day, during a supply run, she felt her heart drop as they crossed paths with a group of hostile individuals. Tension rippled through the air, and Sarah's instincts kicked in, fear gripping her gut. "Hands up," one man shouted, brandishing a weapon. Panic gripped Sarah, but with David beside her, she felt something shift in the atmosphere. Determined to stand firm, she raised her hands slowly, assessing their eyes, desperate for an opening. She shouted, her voice rising above the chaos, "You don't have to do this." The leader hesitated, surprise flickering across his features as he assessed her. It was a chance she needed to seize, willing her voice to maintain its steady strength. "Think about it. If we share what we have, we can all survive." David echoed her, his presence a grounding force at her side. "Let us show you the way." The men stepped back, uncertainty etched on their faces. Sarah's heart raced, but the fear slowly morphed into courage as she pressed on. "We're trying to help each other. None of us wants to be here fighting." A tense silence descended, the weight of their collective struggle heavily hanging in the air. The hostility that marked their initial approach began to crack, and the hardened gazes softened just a little. Heavy breaths filled the space as her heart raced, waiting for the decision that might change everything. "All right," the leader finally said, lowering his weapon slightly. This was a life-altering moment. Through a mix of desperation and vulnerability, they had found a way to bridge the chasm of fear. The men began to gather closer, curiosity piqued by their willingness to share. In that heartbeat of connection, Sarah felt the shift within herself. They weren't just guarding a crate anymore. They were actively building a community, a network of trust fortified against the storms of despair. As the sun began to set, casting everything in a golden glow, Sarah realized they had forged a bond stronger than mere survival. They had ignited a spark of hope, showing that in the midst of chaos, collaboration could win against all odds. And as the group settled down that night, laughter echoed against the battered walls of the warehouse, telling stories of resilience and shared purpose. As they sat around the flickering fire, Sarah turned to David and smiled, gratitude flowing through her. He met her gaze. "You took the first step. You were brave enough to reach out." With their allies gathered around them, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she had never anticipated. In a world torn apart, they were reclaiming the threads of humanity, weaving together moments of kindness and strength into a tapestry of survival. And in that moment, surrounded by newfound friends and a sense of community, she understood the beauty of relying on one another. They were no longer guarding a supply crate, they were nurturing a legacy of compassion, proving that in the face of darkness, light could still shine through. Together, they embraced the chaos while forging a brighter future, knowing that hope was not merely a flicker in the distance, but a living flame they could nurture together. In this battle for survival, Sarah had found something far more valuable than food or supplies. She had found the power of connection. The echo of her own heartbeat was the only sound filling the dimly lit warehouse, the oppressive silence wrapping around Sarah like a cold shroud. She crouched beside a large wooden crate, her eyes scanning the shadows, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. The world outside had descended into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, punctuated by the muffled shouts of people in desperation. This crate wasn't just a pile of supplies, it was the last line of defense for her small group of survivors. She hadn't eaten since dawn, and the gnawing hunger twisted in her stomach like a desperate creature trying to claw its way out. Each minute felt like an eternity as she tried to focus. The floor creaked under her weight, and panic surged through her veins at every sound. She had volunteered for this job, believing it her duty to protect what was left of their lives. Just as she began to lose her concentration, she heard footsteps approaching quick and heavy. Her heart raced, fear coiling tightly in her chest. Was it someone looking to steal their supplies? Or worse, was it one of the marauders that roamed the streets, desperate and dangerous? Taking a deep breath, Sarah gripped the knife tighter, preparing for what was to come. When the figure came into view, her entire body relaxed for just a moment. It was David. His expression was frantic, filled with urgency. He whispered, rushing toward her, the tension breaking just a bit. She asked, her eyes darting to the shadows around them. "For now," he replied, his voice serious, but there was an edge of hope. "I came to find you." The question hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Sarah felt the color drain from her face. She opened her mouth to reply, but found she couldn't. The truth felt too raw to admit. Instead, she shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I'm fine," he countered, a flicker of concern crossing his features. Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her. Ignoring it, she retorted, "I can handle it." David took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You can't keep this up. Look at you, Sarah. You're not fine. No one can do this alone." As he spoke, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, wrapped piece of bread. He extended it toward her, sincerity radiating from him. She hesitated, pride battling with hunger. "I can't take that from you." "No, I need you to stay strong. We're relying on you," he insisted, his eyes steady. As she stared at the bread, a wave of vulnerability crashed over her. The weight of her loneliness surged forward. No one had cared about her well-being for so long, and here David was, offering something precious amid the chaos. She felt warmth in her chest, yearning for connection even as the fear gripped her. Finally succumbing, she reached out, taking the bread from his hand. Their fingers brushed, lingering for a brief moment, igniting something unspoken between them. "Thank you," she murmured. "Now eat," he instructed, watching her with keen eyes. Taking a tentative bite, the flavors burst in her mouth. It was dry but full of life, and Sarah couldn't help but close her eyes momentarily, savoring not just the taste, but the generosity behind it. It was more than just food, it was a lifeline. David continued to watch her, a warm smile creeping onto his face as she chewed. She swallowed and met his gaze. "What about you?" David laughed softly, shaking his head. "I want to help you." Before Sarah could respond, a rustling sound echoed from the far corner of the warehouse. Instinct kicked in again. Her heart raced as adrenaline surged through her body, and she gripped the knife tightly, craving that familiar feeling of safety. She asked, her voice tense. "Stay behind me," David instructed, stepping closer to the source of the noise. She replied aggressively. Tension crackled in the air, every heartbeat echoing in her ears as she reluctantly nodded, holding her breath as he moved cautiously toward the sound. Moments felt like forever as she waited, her fear morphing into panic. She whispered, but her voice barely penetrated the stillness. "Just a second," he called back, the urgency tightening his tone. Then he stepped back into her line of sight, and she felt her heart drop. In his hands he clutched a small, scraggly dog, its ribs sticking out starkly beneath its dirty fur. "It's just a dog," he said, a relief washing over him. Sarah blinked, the tension easing as she moved closer. The little creature looked up at them with big, soulful eyes, too thin to be anything but desperate. David knelt down, extending his hand. "Hey there, little one," he cooed softly. Sarah asked, crouching beside him as the dog sniffed curiously, inching closer to David's palm. "Looks like we're not the only ones in need," he said, glancing at her. As they fed the little dog scraps of the bread, Sarah felt warmth unfurl in the pit of her stomach and unexpected joy settling over them in the dark warehouse. "Even the little things know how to look for help," David said, looking at her with a spark of determination in his eyes. "Yeah," Sarah agreed, laughing softly. David smiled back, and for a moment the shadows began to lift. They were no longer just guarding supplies, they were sharing hope. "Tomorrow," David continued, "let's set out to find more food." The thought hung in the air between them, a tentative idea poised on the brink. Sarah asked, hesitation creeping into her voice. "Yes," he said resolutely, "we're part of something bigger now." His words rippled through Sarah like a tide, awakening something deep within her. She had been so focused on survival, so alone in her fortress of fear, that she hadn't considered the strength found in unity. As days rolled on, they continued to scour the surrounding areas for supplies. With each little victory, they forged a deeper bond, laughter intertwining with anxiety as they navigated the dangers of a fractured world. It was on one of these trips that Sarah found herself more alive than she had in months. But then came the day that changed everything. While foraging near an abandoned grocery store, they turned a corner, and their breath caught as they came face to face with a group of armed men. The air thickened with tension, fear wrapping around them swiftly like a vice. "Hands up," the leader shouted, wielding a gun with practiced ease, his expression hardened. Sarah's heart raced. She glanced at David, who instinctively placed himself in front of her. "Stay behind me," he murmured, but she shook her head, unwilling to be sidelined now. She stepped forward, adrenaline surging through her. Her voice, though shaky, was louder than the buzz of fear. The leader snapped, eyes narrowing. "We can work together," Sarah said, her heart thundering in her chest. "You don't need to fight, we've got supplies." For a heartbeat, the group hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces. Sarah's mind raced as she fought against panic, trying to read their reactions. She pressed, her voice rising above the chaos. "We've lost so much, but together we could survive." The murmur of uncertainty spread among the intruders. For a fleeting second, Sarah saw the leader's grip on his gun falter, doubt creeping into his hardened demeanor. But then a sharp yell rang out from behind them, a loud crash followed by frantic footsteps. A new group had arrived, armed, dangerous, and ready to take what they could. David shouted, instinct tearing through the air as chaos erupted all around them. In that split second, everything changed. Sarah's breath came in quick bursts as she ducked instinctively, her heart pounding like a drum. The initial group looked back in confusion, hesitation melting into panic as the new threat approached. David yelled, pulling her arm desperately as they fled deeper into the store, the world around them spiraling into a web of chaos. The warehouse, the supplies, their budding community, all of it faded into the background as adrenaline coursed through her, drowning out her thoughts. They needed to survive, but fear clawed at her mind, whispering questions she couldn't afford to face. Would they ever find safety again? As they dashed through the aisles filled with abandoned food and broken debris, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. They had fought to build something real, a flicker of hope amid despair. But now it was all slipping away. With each step, uncertainty chased them like a predator hungry for its prey. Would they make it out alive? Would the community they had begun to build survive the storm? In the chaos, fear took hold, but so did a roar of determination. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for each other, for the bond they had forged in this bleak new world. And as they burst through the exit, gasping for breath under the darkening sky, Sarah realized something profound. Their journey was just beginning. In the depths of chaos, amid pursuit and uncertainty, they were still a part of something greater, a chance to rebuild, to protect what little light remained, and to fight for each other, no matter the odds. But even as she ran, a shadow loomed over them, and the night had only just begun to unfold. The danger was far from over, and they were just at the beginning of a fight for survival that would test them in ways they never imagined. With adrenaline surging, she caught David's eye, their resolve firm as they sprinted into the unknown, the weight of their struggle hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. The fight was just beginning, and somehow they were ready to face it together.